Next up, we have Connor McCarty, Managing Director and Investment Strategist at Wellington, Singapore. Wellington is our valued strategic partner. Under our close partnership, our United Global Healthcare Fund, which celebrates its 20th anniversary this year, was born of this collaboration. Over the past 2 decades, the fund has won numerous awards and is recognized in the industry as one of the best healthcare sector funds. Today, we are pleased to have Connor give us an update on the development of vaccines and new therapies for COVID-19, as well as insights on the healthcare sector. Hopefully, this will help us get ahead of the curve as we frame our investment strategy in a post-pandemic world. Over to you, Connor.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you very much to UOB for the great honor of speaking to everyone today. And I first have some quick initial thoughts, and the first starts with an old expression, which is, necessity is the mother of invention. And this is nowhere more true than healthcare, and specifically in the area of COVID-19 research right now. The acceleration in research is remarkable, as we all know and have read, both in vaccines and other treatments that are moving forward quite promisingly. And I'll talk about another area today, which is a bit more of a silent revolution in other very critical areas of healthcare need that are equally impressive, both in terms of their creation of very important new therapies and the way they're impacting portfolios potentially. And investing in healthcare is really very compelling right now. You have secular tailwinds coming from increased demand that are longstanding and will continue. You also have growth, and importantly, valuations are reasonable in a world where valuations can be rather expensive. Okay, so you can see the title of this presentation, and it says the COVID-19 Panacea, the road to a vaccine. So I'll stick with that road metaphor, and maybe we can look at the next image and have a look at this street. And this is a street from long ago, 120 years ago in New York. It's Fifth Avenue. And what do you see? Well, if you're like me, the first thing you saw were a lot of horse and buggies, some well-dressed people. But if you look in the center, there's a red ring. Look on your screen and see if you see that circle. And within it, there's one automobile. And that automobile was very unusual at that time, as you can imagine. And I think people probably looked at it at the time and said, wow, this is fascinating and a toy for the rich. But if you move forward in time, 13 years later, on that same street in New York, you see quite a change in the landscape. Same street, completely new automobiles that have replaced the horse and buggy. And this really underscores both the speed and impact that innovation can have, and the fact that it sort of sneaks up on us most of the time. But if you spotted this change early and invested wisely enough, you would have done very, very well. But unlike the street, getting there is not as straight and narrow. And that's true of investing in general, and specifically in healthcare. We'll talk about that today. But the bottom line is stock selection is incredibly important. Okay, now let's look at another street. And we're moving to our modern age, which has been tough. This is 2 photographs, one of New York, the other of the Ginza district in Tokyo in April. Now, fortunately, things have improved to a considerable degree. But you can see this is not a state of affairs that we want to persist. And, we've seen a massive toll in terms of lives lost, about 650,000 lives, many people contracting COVID-19, about 16 million people. But fortunately, we're also seeing great progress in new therapy and vaccine development. There's an impressive R&D race going on right now that I'd like to share with you. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. These are different therapies in trial today for vaccines, and then also therapies for people who already have COVID-19. And you can see that's a lot. And I'm showing you the progression to different trial stages and the advancement of different ventures out there. And thanks to recent scientific breakthroughs like gene sequencing, a vaccine effort that would have normally taken at least 4 years, perhaps more, to get to approval, may be out as early as the first part of 2021. perhaps earlier. We'll have to see what results happen and what governments decide. But the key point is there's help on the way, and you're seeing therapies as well. We already have particular therapies, dexamethasone, remdesivir, and monoclonal antibodies are being worked on. So promising ways that will improve our world going forward. So not all is despair, but it is important from an investment perspective to note, and I find very interesting, that when I speak with my healthcare colleagues at Wellington, and we have 14 experts in healthcare, each of whom is very, very specialized, many of whom are actually scientists, PhDs. We have an infectious disease doctor as well. I'm always interested by how nuanced their views are, both from a scientific and investment perspectives. But before I tell you more about that, let's take a quick poll. And the question is really, are COVID-19 stocks a good way to invest? Let's see what you think about that. And I'll give you a moment to contemplate that, and hopefully we'll get the poll results. And I will be honest, it's a bit of a trick question, and it's a hard one too, but go ahead and give it a try. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you that our view is really that it may be for some, but not for most. And here we have it. Okay, so, a relatively balanced view on things. And really from a Wellington perspective, and given the knowledge of our experts, we really do think there's going to be a narrow list of winners out of all of this. And you can see that there are many different companies approaching this big endeavor. And there are certain stocks, and I'll show you right now, you can see a certain stock chart for a company that has gone up a lot. You can see that at the beginning of the year, they were at $5 a share, and now they're at over $130 a share. That's quite remarkable. The B that makes that happen, you might think that they have the answer itself in their pocket right now. Well, this is a company, in fact, if we look at the facts a little more closely, that has never brought a vaccine to market successfully. And they've attempted numerous times through the decades. It isn't even a profitable business. And they're still in phase 1 trials. So there are many hurdles ahead, and we have to see much more information to make any clear evaluation. Yet the stock price has gone through the roof, and what could possibly be driving that? Well, it's anyone's guess, but I would say perhaps it's to do with the fact that the U.S. government has been giving companies broadly, a number of different companies, some support in the way of money to help augment their research and development and potentially development of a vaccine. They're doing that broadly, and this is one of the companies that's received that money. Now, that does not mean that they have the answer. The country is really just, placing bets across the board. But some investors, I think, are moving ahead of themselves on this one. And the reason I mentioned that to you is that, you can see the risks of speculation in this area are great, and please avoid that. And consider the points that I share with you on the next slide that will hopefully inform your perspective in that regard. And here's what I mean. Let's assume a company gets their therapy or vaccine approved. And that's a very, very big assumption, of course. It's quite possible that other companies will as well. And we're optimistic that there will be more than one vaccine at some point. And they may be even more effective or more cheap. Then you have to ramp up production to a massive scale very, very quickly. And that costs money. So you're seeing partner with other companies and governments lend money or get money. And of course, when you do that, you're squeezing margins because you're sharing. And that's not good for the shareholder necessarily. And to top it off, some companies have said very nobly that if they do succeed with a vaccine, they would seek no profit. Now, what kind of companies do we look for in this case? We actually look for companies that are both working hard, developing a COVID-19 vaccine or therapy, but they have much more going for them. They have other portfolio of assets in very critical areas of need, some of which I'll talk about with you in a moment. That's the right way to go about investing in this space. We also think there's some great opportunities in areas that people typically don't think of. And we'll look at that right now, and I'm talking about testing. Testing is a big area of opportunity, and it is essentially going to be with us for some time to come. Even if we get a vaccine quickly, there is a need to have testing. And this chart shows you for the U.S. alone just how dramatic the testing has exploded. It's been, it's gone from a very appalling rate of limited testing just 4 or 5 months ago to now. This shows around 42 million tests. Actually, as of today, it's 53 million tests conducted. And it's about 800,000 tests per day. And the reason is we need to test and track and trace. That's a really very large number. But what's more impressive is there's probably going to be a need for another 400 to 700 million tests over the next 12 months in the US alone. And that's a $60 billion revenue opportunity. That's just one country. So testing demand is not going away. It's creating profits. And there are companies in the medical technology space that are benefiting right now. Now let's pivot to some other areas outside of COVID-19 that in our view present investment opportunities of another sort. But first, it's time for another quiz. And the question is, which of these diseases is currently the top cause of death? You have 4 choices. Good luck. And I will make it a little easier for you. I divulge one, it's not durian. And I understand that some of you might choose it, and I understand how you feel, but that's not a correct answer. So you only have to choose from 3 here. Good luck to you. And the answer, I'll tell you up front, because I think most of you have done your voting, is cardiovascular disease. And again, we have a very smart class here. So well done on that. Cardiovascular disease alone takes 50,000 or so lives every day. Cancer, 26,000 lives every day. It's tragic. And my point is that there are other major healthcare needs out there. And until quite recently, treatment options in some of these areas hadn't really changed for years. But now we're seeing amazing developments. And this is coming from the massive research efforts of healthcare companies around the world. And this shows you what I'm talking about. But first, I'll use a metaphor. There's an aphorism, you reap what you sow. And I think it's great advice. To me, what it means is that in life, you get what you put in and give to others. And in the same way, companies that focus on research and development and innovate tend to grow and outcompete over time. And this chart shows the research and development dollars spent within certain sectors every year. And at the top of the list, of course, you see biopharmaceutical companies. The R&D is massive. It's about $250 billion per year. And to put that number into perspective, if the healthcare industry R&D budget alone was a country, it would comfortably rank in the top 50 countries in the world in terms of GDP. So that is a big number. And it's paying off in a significant way. The healthcare sector has one of the best growth rates and highest earning growth rates of any sector out there. Again, you reap what you sow. But what does that mean in terms of the number of drugs under development now? And we'll take another quiz here to see if you can get the answer. This time I'm not giving you any hints. And here it is. How many medicines are currently in development? Is it somewhere 500 to 1,000? Or is it 10,000 to 15,000? You have a number of choices there. And I wish you luck. I think what you'll find is that the number is very different. It was, let's just say, 5 or 10 years ago. And it is a very big number, but I'll wait for the results to give you the opportunity to see what all of us have thought on this. 5,000 to 10,000 has done well. That's great. Now, again, a wise group of listeners. The answer is actually that it's over 7,000 or so. So it's a big number, and it's vastly different than it was just 10 years ago. And that's thanks to a number of fundamental changes in technology and scientific knowledge. But if history is a guide, it's important also to note that only about 11 or 12% of this long list of therapies will actually make it to end patients. And that's because the hurdles are very, very high, as they should be. But that's part of the opportunity too, because picking winners in healthcare is very, very profitable if you get it right. So stock selection is critical. Now let's look at the pace of innovation and perspective from new drug approvals by the regulators over recent years to see if all of this work is turning into anything. And this chart shows you the trend in novel drug approvals in the US over time, and you can see the progress has really inflected. Now, if I were to show you the similar type of data for China or Japan, the EU, you would see a similar pattern. It's a very promising pattern, of course. And in the US alone, last year, 48 novel drugs, and these are drugs that don't have any equivalent, they are brand new innovations in our world, were approved in 2019. The chart looks very similar, as I mentioned, for other areas of the world. And another 30 therapies have been approved this year alone, year to date, in the US. So amidst a pandemic, we're still seeing quite a bit of progress out there. Okay, now let's zoom into some areas where these therapies are actually making a difference. And our time today will not allow us to touch on all these areas, but I'll touch on just a couple. For many years, cancer patients really had limited options, often radiation and chemotherapy, which changed very little over the years. But over the last 5 years, a whole new class of drugs has come into play. And they're designed really to activate our own immune system to attack the cancer cells within us. This has become a reality, and it's helping improve cancer survival significantly with certain cancers. One class of these are called checkpoint inhibitors. They're medicines that essentially reveal cancer cells that try to hide from our immune system. And once they are revealed and that mechanism is reversed, your own immune system attacks those cancer cells and can have really profoundly positive effects in areas like melanoma and in lung cancer and a number of other areas. So this didn't exist 5 years ago, at least not approved. And the world has changed a lot as a result. This particular medicine alone has gone from zero to, we believe, in another 3 or 4 years, being upwards of $25 billion in revenue opportunity. So growing very, very rapidly, and there's a reason. It's changing lives, it's improving health. And there are other drugs in that same category that are innovating and new, better ways of treating cancer than ever before. Now, I'll shift from cancer and talk about gene therapy, which is also very exciting and even, relatively speaking, newer in terms of approvals. And this is an area of treatments that are for conditions that are genetically based, as the name implies. And there are some genetic mutations that can cause disease in certain people. And let's look at an example of that. But first, what we'll do is we'll look at the picture in front of you right now, which shows two panels. One is on the right, it's tunnel vision. So it's essentially the level of sight that a child with a condition called retinitis pigmentosa would have at the latter stages of that concern. And now what if you could take that sight and convert it to something much closer to the panel on the left? That would be miraculous, without any exaggeration. Well, a few years ago, a company received approval for the first gene therapy ever to treat this condition. It targets a specific genetic mutation that triggers this condition. And I really do invite you. There's a YouTube video up there that shows a boy who is a patient, and the doctors are monitoring and diagnosing his level of sight So he has to go through a dimly lit room with a maze in it, and he struggles mightily. But then after treatment with this therapy, he's actually able to maneuver very, very comfortably and successfully through. It is a profoundly moving sight to behold. And it's an example, a very vivid example of what's going on in medical technology right now. And speaking of medical technology, let's talk about another form of that. And this is a wide area, so let's just focus on robotic surgery for a moment. And this is just a visualization. The image is not of a true product out in the market. But there are surgical robots now in many of the hospitals. And fortunately, humans are managing them. We have surgeons that control them, but it really helps the surgeon's job. They can do preoperative analysis, three-dimensional scans, and so forth that allow them to strategize how they want to approach the patient's needs. And they also make extremely fine and minimal incisions so that the trauma is much lower and the patient is able to recover more quickly. And this actually saves the system money because the hospitalization and relapse risks are much lower. So it's a great example of med tech innovation. And then there are the gene sequencing tools and other tools that have been used, for instance, to really early pandemic assess what coronavirus is. So the complete genetic mapping of the coronavirus took about 2 weeks to not only sequence but to analyze and identify what the likely concerns are. So that's an amazing advance. It took about 158 years to figure out what was driving polio, just as a comparison. But who's going to pay for all this? That's a big question. And I think there's a lot of demand, but there's only so much money in this world. And our existing model, which is a pay-for-service model, and this is true almost everywhere in the world, whether you're in a socialized system or a private system, someone's paying for this. And usually it's a doctor does a certain treatment and they get paid that certain amount. But now we're moving to a pay-for-value model. And this is critical because paying more for better outcomes certainly makes more sense than paying for any outcome or bad outcomes. And this is really changing a lot of areas. And there are companies that are advancing in this area very successfully. And that's important because the US alone spends an unsustainable 16% of its GDP on healthcare spending every year. Unfortunately, there are companies that have figured out ways of improving. And what they're doing is they're moving less acute patient care from high-cost settings, like those shown in the center in the dark blue area, to much less expensive areas, because these are not urgent, highly concerned conditions. And they move them into areas like urgent care clinics and telemedicine and a whole host of other areas. So one company is so large, they have 55 million customers. They're an insurance company. They also have about 1 million doctors and care practitioners, as well as thousands of clinics. They've been able to reduce costs sizably without damaging or reducing the level of quality of care, actually improving it, and they are massively profitable. In fact, they doubled their profits just in the last earnings release. Okay, so it can be done. And now let's look at the total picture of healthcare's growth drivers and the future, in our view. It's the healthcare sector growing because demand is rising. Populations in any part of the world are aging. They're becoming more prosperous. Demand is also durable. Very few of us would turn down healthcare for our loved ones. And as I mentioned earlier, innovation is marching ahead, and the best businesses are profiting. And from a valuation perspective, as well as a growth perspective, healthcare is hard to beat. The sector is attractively valued compared to most every other global sector, and it has a higher growth rate than most every other. The only higher growth rate is in technology. So healthcare's valuations are good on relative lines, and they're also good compared to their history. And if you look at this chart, you get a sense for that. This is comparing the valuation of healthcare right now relative to its own history. And you can see it's moderate. So it is an attractive time to consider exposure in the area. All right, now let's briefly sum up things. And if you recall nothing else, I hope you take away the following understanding. Innovation in healthcare is profound, and the investment opportunity is very real. Healthcare is an expert domain, so you really do need to be a skilled stock picker in the space. And finally, the sector is supported by the drivers that I just mentioned, which really give you a good support that with good stock selection can lead to very positive results, we think, for many years to come. I hope you found the conversation informative, and now I think what I'll do is see if you have any questions, as long as time allows. And I think I'm okay on time. I'll take one question and see if I can get into the question area. Well, okay, I'll take, when will a COVID vaccine be approved, and when will it be widely available? And as I alluded to, I think it's going to be in the first quarter of 2021 in the US or in Europe. But other countries may approve vaccines earlier. In fact, there was some talk that Russia may have an approval coming up. We'll see if that's in fact true. China's also advancing very promisingly on trials, actually involving their military in the trial pool for vaccines. So, it is promising in that regard, but I would underscore one thing. Even when an approval occurs, we still have to get it out to the world's population. The distribution of that will take time. Therefore, we will be in a status where things are getting better, but it won't be flipping a switch. And, we'll see the progress, touch wood, coming from not just one therapy, but numerous ones down the road. Great. And I think my time is up. So I will thank you all for your time. And again, appreciate the honor of being here. And now I'll pass it over to Joy.